fifth season of Money Heist opens with Sierra capturing Professor after investigating the whereabouts of the base from the license plate of a car seen on CCTV. Brandishing a gun at Professor, Sierra, who is fed up with Professor and the actions of the heist group, forces him to divulge all the robbery plans. Professor refused the order and firmly said he would never betray the heist group even if his life was at stake. On the other hand, Lisbon or Raquel, who had previously managed to get into the Bank of Spain building, took over as captain of the heist group and began to lead the robbery. At police headquarters, Tamayo was furious that Lisbon had escaped and this time joined the heist group at the Bank of Spain building. Professor seems to have guessed Tamayo's anger, and the next step that the police officer will take is to try to intervene militarily. So Professor warned Lisbon to prepare the heist group for a possible military attack. However, contrary to Professor's expectations and plans, he is captured, which makes him unable to help the heist group's actions. On the other hand, Tamayo began trying to carry out a military intervention by contacting Sagasta, a military leader. Sagasta is a ruthless war veteran who has no regard for human life, be it a foe or friend. He even warned Tamayo that if he intervened in the robbery, there was no guarantee that all the hostages would survive. In addition, Sagasta also asked to bring his troops instead of a team from the police. The troops, Sagasta told Tamayo, were very experienced in war. Tamayo agreed to all these conditions and began to devise a plan to draw the military into the case without showing that the police had lost control. Finally, Tamayo planned to make false news about Sierra, who was already a fugitive from justice for torturing Rio, and called her a traitor for working with the professor. Meanwhile, Sierra did everything she could to get the professor to talk, but the professor kept his mouth shut even though his legs were shot off and Sierra left him hanging from the roof. After doing everything she could to get the professor to talk, Sierra decided to take another step and ordered Professor to call Lisbon and the other heist members. Professor had to tell Lisbon everything, that he was currently being held hostage by Sierra. Lisbon and the heist members who heard this were instantly distraught, unsure if they could solve the robbery without Professor's help. Fast forward, military forces arrive at the Bank of Spain building, and Lisbon, along with Tokyo and Stockholm, becomes the heist group's representatives to negotiate with Tamayo. They walk out of the Bank of Spain building, and Tamayo asks them to surrender and release all the hostages. Stockholm had already raised the white flag, signaling a peaceful surrender. But as the negotiations progressed, Lisbon realized that Tamayo didn't seem to know about Sierra's taking of Professor hostage. Knowing this, Lisbon had renewed hope that it was still possible to free Professor from Sierra. So she tried to buy time and told Tamayo that they would first free Gandia. Back inside the Bank of Spain building, Lisbon was shocked to see Bogota beating Gandia continuously. Lisbon and the other heist members tried to separate them because Gandia could not be killed after Lisbon promised to free him. But while they were off guard, the hostages led by Arturo stole weapons and threatened the heist members. A shootout ensued as Arturo and the other hostages started shooting at the heist members before finally running away. The heist members did not remain silent and immediately chased them until they finally managed to corner Arturo and the other hostages in a room that became an armory. At the same time as the heist members were busy recapturing the hostages, Sagasta and his troops arrived in front of the Bank of Spain building. Helsinki, who was monitoring the situation outside, reported to Lisbon, who quickly ordered Bogota to release Gandia to withstand the military attack. In the end, the military temporarily withdrew following Lisbon and Tamayo's negotiations. Meanwhile, the siege of Arturo and other hostages is still going on inside the Spanish bank building. Arturo realized that their situation was very urgent and finally tried to provoke Denver's anger to make the heist members' attention divided. But Arturo's words intended to provoke Denver's anger were heard by Stockholm, who used to be his former mistress. Stockholm, who was fed up with Arturo, decided to enter the room through the ventilation hole. The method worked when Stockholm was finally able to enter the armory room and confront Arturo. Unfortunately, at that time, Stockholm could not contain her anger, so she shot Arturo. Meanwhile, at the base, Sierra asked Professor to make a video confession. But at that moment, Sierra sees Benjamin and Marseille coming into the base, so she knocks Professor unconscious and sets a trap for the two. Upon entering the base, Marseille saw Professor sleeping on the bed and didn't realize that Sierra was behind him. Sierra moved quickly and injected Marseille with an anesthetic. Meanwhile, she pointed a gun at Benjamin, who was in the toilet, and forced him to surrender. Back at the Bank of Spain building, Stockholm tearfully realized that her actions in shooting Arturo would endanger the other heist members. So Stockholm tried to save Arturo's life. Lisbon finally decided to release some prisoners along with Arturo so that he could get treatment. Tamayo, on the other hand, attends the press conference to tell the media about Sierra's betrayal and announces Sierra's designation as a fugitive from justice for collaborating with the professor. At headquarters, Sierra saw Tamayo's press conference and was disappointed after doing her best to solve the robbery. The incident distressed Sierra so much that her water broke. Panic ensued as there was no one to help her labor but Professor, Marseille, and Benjamin. Finally, Sierra freed Professor, who then helped her give birth. The fake news about Sierra was heard by the heist members, who then made Lisbon start preparing them for a military attack. Outside the building, Sagasta gets help from Gandia to get through the roof by blowing up the building. Professor sees the military action and is immediately surprised, not expecting the military to take such an extreme step. Sagasta meant it when he said he didn't care if there were casualties in his attack on the bank building, so even extreme measures were taken to catch the robbers. The explosion caused several parts of the building to collapse, one of which fell on Helsinki. Meanwhile, Sagasta and its members who managed to enter immediately attacked the defenses made by Lisbon and other heist members. Before their situation was pressed, Palermo fired a bazooka that left several Sagasta members seriously injured. After receiving a report about it, Tomeo planned to increase the number of troops to help Sagasta inside the building. At headquarters, Professor, who has been freed from Sierra, is trying to find a way to stop the military intervention being carried out by Tomeo. Luckily, Lisbon had previously installed a bug in the handcuffs of the bank governor, who was freed along with the other hostages and Arturo, so Professor can get evidence that Tomeo is slandering Sierra. Professor also used the recording to threaten Tomeo not to add more troops to the building. As a result, Tomeo was once again forced to comply with Professor's orders. Therefore, Sagasta and the remaining troops must continue the battle against the heist group without Tomeo's help. With Sagasta's troops pushed back, Palermo and other heist members managed to free Helsinki from the ruins. Then Denver, Manila, and Tokyo came attacking from the opposite direction, which made Sagasta's troops besieged. The situation was increasingly pressured and Sagasta continued to communicate with Tomeo to request additional troops, but Tomeo was forced to refuse the request. This infuriated Sagasta because he felt he was being used as bait by Tomeo, which prompted him to throw grenades and make things even more chaotic. But the chaos left the heist members scattered, which made it easier for the Sagasta forces to surround and attack more brutally. Tokyo, Denver, and Manila were separated from the heist group members and had to withstand the attacks from Sagasta's troops, but the door that was a barrier to where they were hiding kept getting shot. In the end, Denver and Manila pushed the iron used to hold the door. But on the other hand, Sagasta contacted the sniper outside the building to target the room where the three heist members were. Professor asked Tokyo to stall the attack until he could free them, so Tokyo tried to anger Gandia, who was behind the door. Tokyo's attempt was successful. Gandia's emotions were ignited and he threw a grenade into the room without waiting for a signal from Sagasta first. Inside the room, Tokyo was ready to catch the grenade and throw it back at Sagasta's troops. The grenade exploded and the rest of Sagasta's troops were killed. At that point, Professor ordered Bogota and the other heist members to cut a hole in the metal door to free Tokyo, Denver, and Manila. On the other hand, Stockholm was tasked with rescuing Helsinki, who was seriously injured. Inside her hiding room, Tokyo heard a sound on the other side and started to approach the place and sensed two of Sagasta's men behind the door punching through it. Tokyo didn't have to wait long and opened fire on the door. But unbeknownst to Tokyo, this was done by Sagasta to lure Tokyo to the other side of the room, where there was already a sniper stalking her. The sniper on the other side of the building mercilessly shot Tokyo's legs and hands. Denver and Manila, who saw the situation, immediately tried to save Tokyo, although it was almost impossible without sacrificing their own lives. As things spiraled out of control, Stockholm unexpectedly found a secret passage to a 6-story freight elevator shaft. Though of course, Tokyo's current state makes it nearly impossible to get out using the elevator shaft. Tokyo finally decided to stay indoors and withstand the attacks of Sagasta and his army while Denver and Manila escaped through the freight elevator shaft. This decision made the heist members realize that Tokyo would not survive. The situation was getting more and more precarious as Tokyo was badly injured from the attack of Sagasta and his troops. It was then that Rio managed to break through the floor of the room, and upon seeing Rio, Tokyo said that she was very happy to be able to meet even for the last time. Right at that moment, Sagasta and his troops managed to enter the room and Tokyo blindly shot at them. But still, Tokyo's efforts did not mean much because of the large number of Sagasta troops. At the last second, Tokyo looked back at Rio before turning around and looking at Gandia and Sagasta's troops who had approached her. Tokyo smiled at them and showed a bomb necklace in her hand, which immediately exploded and killed them all. Tokyo's death threw the heist group into disarray. Professor even continued to blame himself, which made him very depressed. On the other hand, Sierra took advantage of the situation to escape from the base. Tokyo's death made Sierra believe that Professor was in an unfavorable situation, so she didn't want to be associated with him. However, Marseille learns that Sierra has escaped and pursues her. A chase ensued, although Marseille eventually relented and let Sierra go. Inside the Spanish bank building, Sagasta stood in the ruined room and informed Tomeo about Tokyo's death. The news pleased Tomeo to the point that he no longer thought about the fact that Tokyo's death took 5 of Sagasta's men, including Gandia. So Sagasta felt vengeful and made sure he would retaliate by ensuring victory was on his side. Then Sagasta began to plan with his 2 remaining troops. Sagasta's plan began with him surrendering to the heist group with one of his men, saying that there were no more men left. At that point, the other female squad would release bombs at all the doors of the building to allow Tameo's troops to enter. Meanwhile, Sagasta and Palermo negotiated to allow the medical team into the building to save Helsinki and the Sagasta members who were also seriously injured. Sagasta agreed to the negotiations, and without Palermo knowing, he had prepared a medical team consisting of 2 military doctors to enter the building as spies. At the same time, Professor finally finds Sierra. They point a gun at each other and Sierra says she's sure Professor won't shoot her because killing was never in Professor's plan. But her assumption was wrong. Professor didn't hesitate to shoot Sierra in the leg. Fortunately, before running away, Sierra had replaced the bullets in Professor's gun so that the shot did not injure her. So once again, it is Sierra who manages to capture and hold Professor hostage in the trunk of the car as collateral for Tameo. Inside the Spanish bank building, Lisbon and Rio made a live video to clarify Tokyo's death, which again angered Tameo and the military. Tameo is even more furious because he had previously planned to attract public sympathy by making a similar video, using the tragic death of Sagasta's troops. Unfortunately, Tameo's plan had already been carried out by Lisbon and Rio. Amid the chaos at the police headquarters, Tameo received a call from his wife who sounded very frightened and asked Tameo to return home. Tameo rushed home and immediately pressed the emergency button for the police to come when he sensed something was wrong in the house. He was not wrong. Sierra was waiting in the room holding Tameo's wife hostage. Sierra threatened Tameo to tell the truth to the media and restore her good name if he didn't want Sierra to turn the tables on him because she had caught Professor. Tameo refused to do as Sierra threatened and instead threatened Sierra by saying the police would soon come to arrest her. Sierra was surprised to hear Tameo's threat and immediately beat him unconscious before running away. Meanwhile, Professor, who was held captive in the car, managed to escape after hearing the arrival of the police. Professor panicked and hid in one of the apartments in Tameo's building, where he came face to face with Sierra, who was already pointing a gun at him. Professor tried to calm Sierra, who was also holding the residents of the apartment hostage, to cooperate. Long story short, Sierra cooperated with Professor and they tried to escape together. This was not easy because Tameo had ordered the police to comb the area around and inside the apartment building. So Professor and Sierra decided to climb out through the window using a rope and then move to hide in an empty apartment room in another building. However, the place was not safe because the police also searched the building, forcing Professor and Sierra to hide on the sofa. Fortunately, the method worked and Professor and Sierra escaped the police. The scene moves inside the Spanish bank building where the heist group, led by Palermo, begins to try to channel the gold grains through the water pipes to Professor's headquarters using a nuclear-powered suction device. At the headquarters, Benjamin, who was ordered to replace Professor's role, temporarily prepares the Serbia group to wait for the arrival of the gold grains. Flashback to the scene 5 years earlier when Palermo and Berlin explained the robbery plan to Professor, including how to get the gold from inside the Bank of Spain to the headquarters. According to Palermo's theory, the device would allow them to transport 90 tons of gold grains in just 1.5 hours. Unfortunately, Palermo's theory did not work well, which made him panic but still refused to give up. It wasn't until Palermo tried again that the machine worked to flow the gold grains. In contrast to the excitement of the heist group who managed to flow the gold into the base, Professor and Sierra decided to rest in the apartment after learning that the police were still combing around the building. At that moment, Sierra expressed her feelings to Professor and said she was afraid of being imprisoned and having to separate from her newborn daughter. Professor tried to calm Sierra down and promised that he would do everything he could to save all the heist group members and Sierra. When things were calmer, Professor accidentally found a cell phone in the apartment, which he used to contact Benjamin at headquarters. After the video call is connected, Professor assigns Benjamin and Marseille to try to free them. Benjamin and Marseille began to plan and entered the apartment building using a garbage truck. Their guess was not wrong. Even in times of emergency, the police would still allow garbage trucks to enter the building. That's when Professor and Sierra got inside the dumpster and managed to escape unnoticed by the police. At the headquarters, Professor saw that Serbia's group had already started working on turning the gold grains from the Bank of Spain into bars. That's when Professor knew that the robbery plan had succeeded and they just needed to execute the plan to get the heist group out of the Bank of Spain building. However, the plan is unlikely to be easy because, inside the building, one of Sagasta's troops is still on the move to remove the traps and bombs spread by the heist group. Likewise, at the police headquarters, officers found irregularities where there was a very strong sound of water flowing from inside the building. Tameo brought in an expert who determined that the heist group was using the water to carry gold out of the Bank of Spain into one of the nation's 7 stormwater tanks. The expert's investigation also suggested that one of the 5 stormwater tanks with a downward flow was being used as a base by Professor. Tameo ordered the police force to search all 5 stormwater tanks. Although they did not find the professor's headquarters at first, in the last stormwater tank the police began to find a clue. Meanwhile, inside the headquarters, the professor leads Serbia's group to load the gold bars into the truck as Marseille sees the police force arriving. Serbia's group grabs their weapons and prepares to fight back, but Professor intervenes because he doesn't want anyone to be victimized. Although Marseille initially refused Professor's orders and insisted on fighting back, they eventually surrendered to the police. The police surrounded and arrested Serbia's group one by one and put them in a car. But something strange happened because, after some time in the car, the vehicle did not move. Professor and Serbia's group members finally tried to free themselves, and how surprised they were when they saw that there were no police at the headquarters but all the gold had been stolen. On the other hand, the police found Professor's headquarters in the stormwater tank but also did not find the stolen gold. The scene switches to show a woman in a car and removing her face covering. She is with a teenage boy who is also wearing a head covering. Behind the car are two trucks carrying stolen gold from Professor's headquarters. The next scene also shows the group members of the mysterious woman cheering because they managed to get the gold. At the headquarters, the professor screams angrily as he realizes they've been duped by another group posing as police. The woman is Tatiana, the ex-wife of Berlin, Professor's younger brother who was killed in the first robbery. Meanwhile, the teenage boy who also joined Tatiana was Raphael, Berlin's son. It is said that before Tatiana divorced Berlin because she fell in love with Raphael, her stepson, she already knew about the Spanish bank robbery plan. Professor himself was furious that after all the sacrifices to rob the gold from the Bank of Spain, another group of robbers simply stole the gold. The plan changed. Professor has a new mission to recover the stolen gold. Professor, Sierra and Serbia's group gave chase, and at that time he informed Lisbon and Palermo about the theft of the gold. He emphasized to Lisbon that no one should know about the theft, especially the police and military. It wasn't long before Professor found the truck carrying the gold but found no one and the gold was gone. Inside the Bank of Spain building, Lisbon was frustrated that their hard work had been in vain. However, Palermo immediately realized that the perpetrator of the theft was none other than Tatiana. During the search, Professor found the hut that Tatiana and Raphael used as a base. Inside, Professor saw a monitor screen and communication devices that Tatiana had used to monitor the heist group's movements. Professor quickly thought and began to formulate a plan. Professor first ordered the heist group to eliminate evidence to distract the police and break the focus of Tomeo's investigation. Then Professor asked Rio to hack into CCTV on the streets across the country to find out the direction of Tatiana and Raphael's journey. Unfortunately, the second step did not work because Raphael had already manipulated the CCTV footage. After receiving a report about it from Lisbon, Professor was finally convinced that the gold would not be hidden far from the headquarters. It is even possible that Tatiana buried and covered the gold with something unimaginable. Professor's guess was not wrong. The scene switches to show Tatiana's group burying 90 tons of gold under a house and building a courtyard on top of it. They did their best to make the house look like a normal residence so it wouldn't be suspected. As Professor and the heist group frantically searched for the stolen gold, one of Sagasta's troops signaled to him that the job was done. At the same time, Tomeo also received a sign from Sagasta to prepare troops to enter from all sides of the building. The attack began with a badly wounded Sagasta soldier suddenly choking, which made Palermo panic to help him. Right at that moment, one of Sagasta's other troops jumped down and disarmed Palermo. On the other side of the building, there was an explosion that allowed Tomeo's troops to enter and immediately surrounded the rest of the building. After that, it didn't take long for all members of the heist group to be subdued and arrested. At headquarters, Tomeo and the other police officers supervised the arrest and applauded loudly when the heist group was arrested. Tomeo believes this is the end of the Spanish bank robbery and calls Professor to say that all the members have been arrested by the police. Professor was on his way to catch up with Tatiana when he heard the news and stopped the car. He got out and was so distraught that he decided to surrender to Tomeo. Tomeo, as well as the members of the heist group who heard Professor's decision, were shocked. However, Professor emphasized that he would not run away and promised to always accompany the heist group. This decision created a sense of despair among the heist group members, who had been convinced that Professor would have another plan to free them. After promising that he would come to the Bank of Spain building to turn himself in, Professor ordered Sierra to take command and find their gold and Tatiana. Sierra is unsure at first, but Professor encourages her, reminding her that of all the police officers, she is the only one who has managed to find him, so he was confident that Sierra would be able to find the gold. Sierra finally complies, and before Professor leaves to turn himself in, he writes a message on a piece of paper and whispers something to Sierra. After the Bank of Spain building was secured, Tomeo went in with the governor of the bank to check the state of the vaults. As expected, they only saw an empty vault, where all the gold was gone. Outside the building, Professor arrived at a huge public welcome despite a heavy military guard. When he entered the building, Professor was greeted by Tomeo, who unceremoniously asked about the gold. Professor did not say that the gold had been stolen but instead refused to reveal the whereabouts of the gold. This infuriated Tameo, and he made an offer to the other members of the heist group to tell him where the gold was in exchange for their release. Of course, the offer was futile as no one knew where the gold was. Unexpectedly, Professor had foreseen this move and taught the heist group how they could use the gold to escape. The flashback scene shows Professor explaining his plan by saying that the gold is state property, so the robbery will cause Spain to experience the worst monetary crisis in history. The threat of a monetary crisis is what they will later use to be able to free themselves if caught. To make sure the plan worked, Professor also made sure they documented the process of smelting and shipping the gold. Before surrendering, Professor had also distributed the video documentation so that the public and the government knew that the gold was no longer in the Bank of Spain. As the Professor expected, the news caused an uproar and even attracted foreign attention. The government pressured Tameo to find the gold, which gave Professor a chance to negotiate. Professor then told Tameo that he would return the gold as long as they were all released. On the other hand, Sierra gathered Serbia's group and began to think that there was no safer place to bury 90 tons of gold than on private property. Sierra also began investigating land purchases in the vicinity to see if there had been any suspicious activity in recent times. To make a long story short, Sierra found a house where land had recently been purchased. She and Serbia's group stormed in and began to find suspicious things about the place. But at that moment, Tatiana's troops arrived and intended to stop Sierra's actions. Before the shootout, Sierra went to Tatiana and Rafael to hand over a piece of paper from Professor. On the other hand, Angel managed to get into the Professor's headquarters and found traces that proved the gold had been moved. Previously, Professor ordered Marseille to destroy the evidence at the base and create a new trail as if the gold was moved from the base to the harbor. Meanwhile, Tameo beats up Professor in an attempt to get him to talk. Tameo also threatened to kill Professor and the heist group if they didn't tell him where the gold was. The threat did not faze Professor. Instead, he offered Tameo negotiations and asked him to clarify to the media that all the gold had been found. Professor also confirmed that the gold would soon be sent back to the Bank of Spain building. Tameo eventually agreed to the negotiations and clarified in front of the media the whereabouts of the gold. While the media was gathering to get Tameo's clarification, a truck pulled in and brought all the gold bars back. Professor deliberately returned the gold in front of the media so that the public and the government would know, and the panic about the monetary crisis could end. Inside the building, Professor reveals that the gold they handed over was fake. Tameo became angry with Professor again and ordered his troops to execute Professor and the heist group. Before the police could kill them, Professor explained that economically there would be no difference even if the gold in the Bank of Spain was fake. The most important thing was not to have a monetary crisis because of the panic it would cause. Tameo, however, refused to listen to Professor's explanation and became even more determined to kill them all. The members of the heist group are terrified, preparing to die, but Professor continues to threaten Tameo that if they are killed then none of the gold will be recovered and Tameo's career will be ruined. Still, outside the building, the crowd heard multiple gunshots before Tameo came out to announce the death of Professor and all the heist group members. Not long after, from inside the Bank of Spain building, the police removed one by one the body bags containing Professor and the heist group. This made the crowd very sad and even cried out loud. So did Denver, who was then secured in a separate place at police headquarters. The scene moves to the police car, where the members of the heist group emerge from the body bag alive. Professor's negotiations were successful and Tameo let the heist group escape by pretending to be dead to save his career and the country's economy. Tameo even gave the heist group members new identities so they could escape and start a new life. On the other hand, Sierra managed to get the gold from Tatiana and Rafael. Fast forward to the next day when the heist group and Sierra meet to part ways under new identities. While shaking hands with Professor, Sierra says that the gold has been stored in Portugal. Money Heist Season 5 was closed by showing the heist group in a helicopter. Meanwhile, Benjamin transports the gold to Portugal. The moral of the series is of course that cleverness and negotiation skills can free us from even the most difficult situations. It also shows that the gold national treasure means nothing to the country's economy.